Courtrooms are supposed to be calm, controlled spaces. The judge speaks, the lawyers argue, the jury listens. But what happens when grief and rage become too heavy for silence? What happens when families face the person who took their loved one? Tonight, we're looking at three cases, three young defendants whose crimes shattered families, triggered chaos inside courtrooms, and left behind questions about justice, punishment, and what the law can or cannot heal. On August 2, 2019, South Carolina was shaken by the killing of 18-year-old Willie Antoine Fields. His life was just beginning when it was cut short by a 19-year-old named Lindy Lamont Jones. The crime itself wasn't complicated in its facts, but it was devastating in its impact. Witnesses and investigators confirmed that Lindy and his younger brother Jaylyn Devonair Jones were involved in the murder. A young man lost his life, and two others barely out of their teens would soon lose their freedom. In court, Willie's mother Angela Fields took the stand. Her voice cracked as she explained that Willie was her only child, the center of her world. Her husband, Willie Clay Fields, tried to hold his grief quietly, but the silence of the courtroom proved too much. He suddenly broke down and lunged toward Lindy, punching him in the head and tackling him to the ground, forcing deputies to intervene and separate them. That moment, raw and uncontrolled, showed the real weight of the crime in a way no written transcript could. The law in South Carolina is clear. When someone intentionally takes another's life, it falls under the state's homicide statutes. Murder, under South Carolina Code 16-3-10, is defined as the killing of any person with malice aforethought express or implied. It carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 30 years and can extend to life imprisonment. When the defendant is young, the court weighs whether to treat him as a juvenile or as an adult. In Lindy's case, the evidence, age, and severity meant adult charges. The court found Lindy guilty and sentenced him to 35 years in prison. His younger brother Jaylyn, 18 at the time, was charged as an accessory after the fact, with his case remaining pending. The breach was clear. The law had been broken at its core, a life taken with intent. The punishment was heavy but still finite. Unlike the permanent loss the Fields family endured, education juvenile crimes test the balance between rehabilitation and retribution. Families want justice, but courts must also consider a young defendant's capacity to change laws. South Carolina Murder Statute SC Code AN 16-3-10 governs intentional killings with malice. Breach. Lindy Jones caused the death of Willie Fields, with his brother's involvement consequences. Lindy sentenced to 35 years. Jaylyn's accessory charge pending. If South Carolina's case was shocking, Houston, Texas brought a tragedy even harder to comprehend. On January 11, 2022, 16-year-old Diamond Alvarez was walking her dog when she was shot 22 times. The shooter was 17-year-old Frank DeLeon Jr., someone Diamond knew well. They had been in a relationship, and at the time of the shooting, they were on the verge of breaking up. Investigators pieced together that the rejection and jealousy spiraled into violence. Frank ambushed her and fired repeatedly. The courtroom scene months later was unbearable. As Diamond's mother, Anna Machado, spoke about her daughter's last moments, Frank sat at the defense table and smirked. That smirk shattered any fragile sense of order. Diamond's uncle rushed from the gallery, attacking Frank. Deputies swarmed the room, trying to pull the two sides apart. Frank's own mother jumped in to defend him, which escalated into a fight between both families right there in the middle of a murder trial. The outbreak was chaotic, painful, and symbolic of the rage boiling under the surface. When victims' families see an offender show no remorse, Texas law is unflinching on murder. Under Texas Penal Code 19.02, murder is defined as intentionally or knowingly causing the death of another person. The punishment can range from 5 to 99 years or life in prison, depending on circumstances. Because Frank was over 17, he was tried as an adult despite his young age. His conduct, the ambush, the number of shots fired, and his courtroom behavior all played into the perception of a dangerous, unrepentant killer. Frank eventually accepted a plea deal and was sentenced to 45 years in prison. It was a punishment that ensured decades behind bars, but as Diamond's mother admitted afterward, no sentence could give her daughter back. She apologized for her own outburst in court, but explained the unbearable cruelty of listening to a smirking teenager who had executed her child education intimate partner. Violence doesn't only occur in adults. Teen relationships can carry jealousy and volatility that escalate to lethal levels, especially when firearms are accessible. Law's Texas Penal Code 19.02. Murder establishes penalties of 5 to 99 years or life breach. Frank ambushed and shot Diamond Alvarez 22 times in a breakup dispute. Consequences. Frank received a 45-year sentence after a plea deal. He will serve decades before any possibility of parole. Our third case goes to East Cleveland, Ohio, and it's darker still. Michael Madison was not a teenager, but his crimes tore through a community and brought one of the most explosive courtroom moments in recent memory. Between October 2012 and July 2013, Madison murdered 3 women: Angela Deskins, 38, Shatisha Sheely, 28, and Sherelle DeTerry, 18. His crimes were gruesome, involving not only murder, but the abuse and concealment of corpses. Police eventually linked the bodies to him and brought him to trial. The charges stacked up multiple counts of aggravated murder, kidnapping, and abuse of a corpse. Under Ohio Revised Code 2903.01, aggravated murder applies when someone purposely causes the death of another with prior calculation, or while committing certain felonies like kidnapping. It is a capital offense, eligible for the death penalty. In court, the families listened as the charges were read and the evidence was laid bare. Then came the moment that stunned the courtroom when Van Terry, father of Sherelle DeTerry, gave his impact statement. He spoke to the judge about forgiveness, about loss, about the unbearable absence of his daughter. Then he turned to face Michael Madison. Madison smirked. That smirk was the final straw. Van Terry lunged forward across the courtroom, deputies barely able to hold him back. The trial concluded with the jury recommending death. Judge Nancy McDonnell imposed the sentence, describing Madison's acts as incomprehensible: the abuse, the binding of victims, the discarding of their bodies in trash bags. The law provided the ultimate punishment, but even the death penalty could not erase the horror of what had been done. Madison now sits on death row, awaiting execution, education, serial killings test, every part of the criminal justice system: investigation, prosecution, and the management of victim families in court. It shows how offenders' courtroom behavior can ignite explosive grief. Law's Ohio Revised Code 2903.01, aggravated murder, eligible for capital punishment. Breach: Madison killed 3 women with prior calculation, kidnapped them, and desecrated their remains. Consequences. Sentenced to death after jury recommendation, awaits execution on Ohio's death row. 3 defendants, 3 courtrooms, 3 different punishments: decades in prison, multi-decade sentences, and even death. Yet all share the same core: a crime of murder, a law that defines it, a punishment that tries to balance justice with deterrence. These cases reveal something deeper than statutes and verdicts. They show how law and raw human emotion collide in public view. A statute can define murder, but it cannot define grief. A sentence can be measured in years, but not in the tears of a parent who will never again see their child walk through the door. Education courtrooms aren't only places of law, they are stages where grief, rage, and remorse, or the lack of it, play out. Laws always link back to the governing statutes: South Carolina Homicide Law, Texas Penal Code 19.02, and Ohio Revised Code 2903.01. This anchors the story in law breach. These crimes weren't accidents. They were deliberate breaches: shootings, ambushes, multiple murders. That's the anchor for the narrative tension. Consequences: prison terms of 35 and 45 years, and the death penalty for Madison. These are the punishments law prescribes, but also reminders of what punishment can't undo.